Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot, daf Kuf Gimel. This week's learning is sponsored by Audrey Mandro in loving memory of Bessie Nani Maskov, Bashalea Bat Sivya Chaya, and Meir Yehuda. A kind and gentle mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She embraced Torah learning and the love of Torah. May her neshama have an aliyah. Okay, we're going to get started with at the bottom of daf Kuf Bet. Okay, I'll remind everyone there's a siyum next week, so make sure to register Thursday, April 30th. Okay, all the details are on the homepage of the website if you haven't seen them. Easy to find. Okay, Zolavi b'machvat. So now we had a case. Let's just review our case in the Mishna. We're starting this whole issue of somebody taking a vow and what do we mean by that vow. And we're going to really get into all sorts of sugyot and issues that we talked about in Masechet Nedarim. What did I mean by what I said? So if someone says, Harei alai, to bring a mincha in a certain way, a machvat, and then they bring it in a marcheshet, so it's a problem. But what do we say? You bring it anyway because maybe the person was bringing a different vow. Just because they're bringing now something other than they said doesn't mean they made a mistake, brought the wrong thing. So you continue to bring the mincha. Like right now, all you did was put in the marcheshet, but you continue the process. Take the ukimta, burn it because it's fine. It's a different mincha, but you still have to bring the mincha that you promised. However, if someone said, this solet is going to go for a machvat, and then you put it in a marcheshet, well, it's disqualified. Okay, so the Gemara asks, why is it disqualified? Theoretically, you should say, V'hatanya lo kitshum kli sharet. The kli sharet doesn't sanctify. What's the problem? Well, the problem is it became sanctified when you put it in that sanctified vessel, in the marcheshet. And sanctified as a marcheshet, and that's why it's too late. It's like a point of no return. They say, but if you put in a kli sharet by mistake, you did the wrong thing, it shouldn't actually sanctify it. So they say, I'm Rabbi, no, you misunderstood that braita. Lo kidshum li karev, aval kidshum li pasel. It's not sanctified. If you put something in the wrong vessel, it's not going to be sanctified to be able to put it on the altar, but it's sanctified enough to disqualify. We've made this distinction many times. It's enough to sanctify it to say you ruined it. It's just not enough to sanctify it to say, well, now we can put it on the altar. Va'amar Abai, another thing. Abai says, Lo shanu ela shekeva'an b'shat neder. When is this going to be disqualified? If I said, right, this solet will be for a machvat, and then I put it on a marcheshet, that's only if at the moment I took the vow, I used the word machvat, or marcheshet, or word of shnei kelim, one keli, whichever case we take. But it had to be at the moment I took the neder. When else could it have happened? Aval b'shat hafrasha lo. There's different stages in bringing the sacrifice. There's the moment where I vow I'm going to bring this. Then there's the moment where I go get the solet, right? And I say, okay, I take it physically. Now, if I basically said, at the time of the neder, this solet, and you took it, okay, is going to be for machvat, then it's a problem. But if at the time of the neder, I just said, Harei alai mincha, I'm going to bring a mincha, and only when I took the solet later did I say, this solet I'm going to bring on a machvat, and I specified, then it's not a problem. Why not? Because the pasuk says, okay, I'll read you the whole pasuk. It's in Varim chapter 23, verse 24. Motza sfatecha tishmor, watch the words that come out of your mouth, keep them, right? Observe them. V'asita ka'asher nadarta l'Hashem Elokecha, and do like you promised to God. So ka'asher nadarta, it says, like you made your vow. V'lo ka'asher hifrashta. Has to be in the vow itself that you said machvat for you to be able to ruin it by doing the wrong thing. But if at the time of the vow you kept it very open, ambiguous, and you just said I'm bringing a mincha, and then when you hifrashta, when you designate the animal, there's no significance to any words you say when you designate the animal. The words you have to keep are the words of the vow. That's not a vow. When I go and take it and I say this solet I'm going to bring I'm putting in a machvat, that's not a vow. Okay, it has to be at the time you made the vow. And not only Abai says this, but now we're going to go to Eretz Yisrael and see that it's also said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. It marnami amar Rabbi Acha bar Chanina amar Rabbi Asi amar Rabbi Yochanan, passed down in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Lo shanu ela shekava'an b'shat neder, aval b'shat hafrasha lo kasher nadarta v'lo kasher hafrashta. Okay, it says exactly word for word the same thing. Now we're going to move on to the next Mishnah. Ha'omer harei alai mincha min ha'se'orim. Now, let's talk about minchas and what they're brought from. When you bring a voluntary mincha offering, it's only from solet, which comes from wheat. You can't bring a voluntary offering of barley. There are two offerings that come with barley. One is the mincha omer, and the other is the mincha sota. Those both come with barley, but you can't bring a voluntary offering with barley flour. You only bring it with wheat flour. So, if you say mincha min haseorim, which doesn't exist, what do we do with it? So, yavi min hachitim, you bring it from the chitim. Okay? You don't bring sorim, you bring chitim, and you don't not bring anything. You might have thought, there's no such thing as a minchat sorim. Comes Tana Kama and says, no, you bring the proper mincha with wheat. Okay, we're going to have to figure out why this is, because you didn't commit to bring a mincha with wheat, so we'll hold off right now. Kemach, we're now going to have a slew of examples where somebody promises to bring something like flour. Now remember, you don't bring it from flour, you bring it from solet. What's the difference? Flour is powdery, solet is it's like granules of flour. Remember, you put in that last sifter, and what's left at the top is what you use. What the bottom is all the powder comes out. So yavi solet. So if you said kemach, flour, no, that's not what you bring. You bring solet. Okay? And the fact that you said you bring it with kemach and there is no such thing doesn't bother us. Below shemen below levona, without oil, without frankincense. Now again, there are some minchas, the mincha chote and the mincha sota, which come without oil, without frankincense, but there's no, those are obligatory. There's no voluntary ones that come without oil and frankincense. They all come with it. So if you said that, well, yavi shemen levona. Okay, you get the idea. No matter what you said, okay, once you say you're going to bring a mincha, we're going to say you bring a mincha, the regular standard mincha, even though you said you were going to bring a mincha that doesn't exist. Chatzi isaron, half an isaron. Now, there is no such thing. All the menachot come in esronim and full esronim. Okay, if you bring 50, it has to be 50, not 50 and a half. Okay, chatzi isaron, so you have isaron shalem. If you said I'm going to bring a half an isaron, you have to bring a whole one. Isaron v'mechze, if you said I'm bringing 1.5, since there is no such thing, yavi shnayim, you bring 2. Rabbi Shimon potel. Rabbi Shimon disagrees with everything here and says, what are you talking about? You're completely exempt. Because what you said was nonsense. There's no mincha of sorim, there's no mincha of kemach, there's no mincha without shemen and levona. Okay, everything in this Mishnah is absurd. You said totally meaningless statement. Shelo hitnadev kederach hamitnadvim, because you didn't say something that is the way people give voluntary offerings. That's not what you said. So it's basically nonsense. It's a very interesting issue, and we're going to now try to figure out the opinion of Tana Kama. Amai, the Gemara asks why. Neder upitcho imohu. The Gemara says, don't you see what's going on here? Somebody said, I want to bring a neder. What's a neder in pitcho imo? It's a neder, and then the opening. What's an opening? It means an undoing of the neder. In the first phrase, you said, Harei alai mincha. I want to bring a mincha. But then probably in your head you thought, you know what? Maybe I really don't want to do that. So you immediately say something absurd. Min haseorim, which doesn't exist. And so basically what you're saying is, I didn't really mean to say that. Now, in general, we say that toch kedei dibur, immediately after, you can fix something. So it sounds like you could just fix this. Okay? And in other words, meaning you said something and then you realize, oh, I really shouldn't have committed that. So you just finish your sentence with something completely absurd to say, I really meant nothing. So if the person really meant to bring nothing and they meant to undo what they said, why don't we accept that? So Amar Chizkiya Hamani Beit Shammai. Chizkiya says we're going to have two explanations of the Mishnah. The first is Chizkiya, which is a little strange because he explains the simple, the standard opinion in the Mishnah as Beit Shammai, which usually we don't do. But he says this is Beit Shammai, and we're going to quote a sugya from Nazir, where Beit Shammai holds the Amrei Tfos Lashon Rishon. We go by the first words you say. You said Harei alai mincha. It's too late. You can't just toch kedei dibur change. Now, why not? If everything else you can. Well, apparently Beit Shammai is machmir when it comes to nazir and when it comes to hekdesh. Our topic is hekdesh. The other topic is nazir. In those two cases, we don't allow it. Why? Because we want you to take these things seriously. We don't want people to say, I'm going to bring a mincha. Oh, just joking. I didn't really mean it. We treat these things with gravity. You can't just change your mind and try to undo it. So he's strict and he says, we follow the first thing you said. As soon as the words come out of your mouth, Harei alai mincha, you've obligated yourself to a regular standard mincha. What you say after we can disregard completely, okay, if it's ridiculous. Now, this is also based on that Beit Shammai says, he holds it, Ein Adam Motzi Dvarav Levatala. People don't speak nonsense. Okay, so if they really said, Harei alai mincha min haseorim, since there is no such thing, nobody would say such a thing. So it must be that you meant to say Harei alai mincha and you changed your mind and you don't want to bring it. But Beit Shammai doesn't care that you change your mind because it's too late. You've already committed yourself. And you can't just, in those next few words, change your mind about it. Okay, there is something called like to undo your neder. Maybe you could do that, but this isn't the way to undo your neder. Okay, then you have to go to a chacham and you have to say, had I known, I wouldn't have. Okay, that's a whole different thing. But in this statement, you've accepted upon yourself to bring a mincha. Whatever happens after that, it's too late. So now, where do we know this from? Titanan, here's the case by Nazir. It says in the Mishna Nazir, Hareini Nazir mina grogarot umina dvela. Okay, grogarot are fresh figs, dvela are pressed figs. Now, to be a Nazir and basically saying, I'm not going to eat figs. Okay, there's no such thing. A Nazir can't eat grapes. There's no problem to eat figs. So basically, again, this is the same kind of case. You said something that's ridiculous. Okay, Beit Shammai Nazir. Beit Shammai says, we don't care. You already said Hareini Nazir. What you said after that is irrelevant. Beit Hillel, again, you tried to change your mind about it, but it's too late. Beit Hillel remain no Nazir. Beit Hillel said no. You said something that's nonsense, and we just ignore it. So what comes out here, according to Chizkiya, is that our Mishna follows Beit Shammai. Tfos lashon rishon, we go by the first words you say. Rabbi Yochanan takes a different approach. His approach is what we call an ukimta. He says, really, Beit Hillel would say you're not a Nazir, and Beit Hillel would probably say, here, you don't have to bring a mincha. But this case is unique because it's only in a situation where, we're going to read this right now, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, afilu tema Beit Hillel. I can explain the Mishnah by Beit Hillel. Be'omer. Be'omer means in a case where somebody says, Ilu hayiti yodea she'ein nodrim kach, lo hayiti noder kach ela kach. What does that mean? It means, let's say you said these words, Harei alai mincha min haseorim. And I come over to you and I say, listen, there is no such thing as a mincha of seorim. You say, oh, I didn't realize that. If I realized, I would have said a mincha of chitim. Okay? So I said something that doesn't make any sense. To me, it made sense. I thought there was such a thing as a mincha of seorim. You're telling me there isn't? Fine, I just wanted to bring a mincha. Okay? If that's your reaction to somebody saying there is no such thing, or I didn't know you can't bring from kemach, I didn't know you can't bring a half an isaron, had you told me, I would have said a fully isaron, that's why you bring it. Okay? But if you didn't say that, and we don't know, and we think if you just made a complete mistake, and all you wanted to bring was seorim, and there is no such thing, then you don't actually have to bring anything, just like the Nazir case. And that's how Rabbi Yochanan explains it according to Beit Hillel. So Amar Chizkiya. Now we're going to have a different machloket, Chizkiya and Rabbi Yochanan. And what's strange about this machloket is, on the machloket they're going to have about our Mishnah is going to look like each one is on the other side of the machloket. Okay, they flipped. So we're going to have to explain that. So first we'll start with Chizkiya. Amar Chizkiya, lo shanu ela da'amal mincha min haseorim. Now the Mishnah said seorim. So he says the only case of the Mishnah is in the seorim case. It would only work if you said I'm going to bring from barley. Aval amar mincha mina adashim. If you said I'm going to bring a mincha from lentils, which everybody knows there's no such thing as a mincha of lentils. Okay, nobody would think because it's not even a grain, right? Of course, and there's no precedent. And it's sorim. You could see someone will get confused. They see the mincha omer sorim. They think the mincha sota sorim. So you understand the mistake, the confusion. But adashim, no one would ever say that. If you say adashim, no way, no how do you have to bring a mincha. It's obviously a ridiculous statement. So this doesn't actually make any sense according to Chizkiya, because what did Chizkiya say? Tfos lashon rishon. What does that mean? You said harei alai mincha, you accepted a mincha. Anything you say after that is irrelevant. So what should it matter if you said sorim or adashim? So that's what the Gemara is going to ask. Michli Chizkiya kaman amar l'shmate. According to who did he explain his opinion? To Beit Shammai. Said it like Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai mishum tfos lashon rishonu. Their whole logic is go by the first thing the person said. Mali sorim, mali minadashim. What does it matter what they said after that? It's irrelevant. To which they answer, Hadarbe. Must be that because Chizkiya said this, it must be he changed his mind. And it must be he agrees with Beit Hillel. And that's why, let's just explain, that's why it's only sorim. Why? Because you can never have the ukimta of the person said, oh, I didn't realize could bring from adashim. Oh yeah, if that's the case, of course I'll bring with chitim. Nobody in their right mind would ever confuse and think you could bring a mincha from adashim. There's no way, no how. So that's why he said this. He must have changed his mind and goes with what Rabbi Yochanan said, that it really matches Beit Hillel, and it could match Beit Hillel, and it's in a case where the person said, oh, had I realized my mistake. Okay, if they don't say that, then no, but had they realized their mistake, they would have brought chitim. Okay. Now the question is, why did Chizkiya change his mind? Before we move and see Rabbi Yochanan, which we didn't get to yet. Umay time ahadrabe. Why did he change his mind? So Amarava manitin kashite. He struggled with the language of the Mishna. He said, or you could say more like he derived it from what the Mishna did and not what the Mishna didn't do. Okay. My area detani min chamina solim litne min adashim. What's a bigger chiddush according to Beit Shammai? If you're Beit Shammai, what makes more sense to say the more extreme case? Now, if tfos l'shon rishon means we could care less what you say after, then it would have been a bigger chidush. It would be much better to say min ha'adashim, because even when you say something completely preposterous, completely not connected, you still have to go with harei alai mincha. So comes Rava and explains, obviously what was going through Chizkiya's mind was, why did it say sorim and not adashim? Linim min adashim, which would have taught you the more extreme case. That even if you say something completely preposterous, still you have to bring from the chitim. And since it didn't use adashim as the example, and it used specifically something very close to wheat, barley, it must be because the person probably made a mistake. And people only make mistakes with barley. They're not going to make a mistake with lentils. And that led Chizkiya to take Rabbi Yochanan's approach, that it must be that the person made a mistake. And when they asked, do you realize there is no such thing? The person said, oh, I didn't realize. And of course I would have said wheat had I known. That's Chizkiya. So Chizkiya switches to the other side. Now, Rabbi Yochanan is going to also be saying the opposite, but we're not going to say he switches to the other side, because that would be really hard to say. Oh, he switched, okay? So let's see. Rabbi Yochanan amar afilu mina adashim. So Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with Chizkiya again and says, what do you mean? Even if it said mina adashim, still you're going to have to bring chitim. So this makes no sense according to Rabbi Yochanan, because michte Rabbi Yochanan keman amar lishma teke Beit Hillel. Ubeit Hillel mishum detayu besolim tai badashim lo tai. So Chizkiya said according to Beit Hillel, and the whole theory was, to say it fits like Beit Hillel, is because the person made a mistake and thought that they could bring a mincha solim, and when they found out, they said, I would have brought chitim, I would have said chitim, and that's why they bring chitim. But it makes sense a person would make mistakes about barley. It wouldn't make any sense to say they make a mistake about lentils. So that doesn't make any sense. To which they answer, like I said, instead of saying, okay, Rabbi Yochanan went into the other side, and that's why it doesn't matter adashim sorim, because that's Beit Shammai, tfos l'shon rishon, but we don't do that. So what does the Gemara say? Lidvarav de Chizkiya ka'armalei. Rabbi Yochanan said this is a reaction to Chizkiya. And it's what happened. We had a machloket. Chizkiya said like Beit Shammai. Rabbi Yochanan found a way to explain it according to Beit Hillel. Chizkiya moves to Rabbi Yochanan's side based on the language of the Mishna. And Rabbi Yochanan retorts to Chizkiya and says, why'd you change your mind based on that? I can explain to you why the Mishnah used Se'orim and not Adashim, even according to your original theory. Okay, so this isn't Rabbi Yochanan talking according to his opinion, but he's trying to explain to Chizkiya, right? It's kind of funny. Chizkiya moves to his side, and instead of saying, oh, great, I'm so glad you agree with me, he said, why'd you move? I can explain your approach also. Right? Like playing devil's advocate. So he said, my time ahadarpach. Why'd you change your mind? Mishum de lo katani mina adashim, right? Because it doesn't say in the Mishnah lentils, and it instead used the example of barley. And the whole theory was that better to bring the more extreme case, and the adashim is the more extreme case. I'm going to actually prove to you now that you could say the opposite, that adashim is the less extreme case, and the more extreme case, the one that needs more to be taught, that people might have thought otherwise, is actually the barley. And that's why it says barley, all according to your theory. So let's see. Dilma lo mebaya kamar. Maybe it's a lo mebaya structure. Lo mebaya is, I don't even need to tell you this case because it's obvious, but I'm going to tell you the less obvious case. Now again, Chizkiya thought the more obvious case is the barley and the less obvious is the adashim. The fact that it wasn't mentioned proves that it's not true. But Rabbi Yochanan is going to prove the opposite. Lo mebaya min adashim. Di'i kalamemar mihaderhu dahaderbe utfos lashon rishon. I don't even need to talk about adashim. It's obvious because if you hold tfos lashon rishon, when you say something so extreme, it makes no sense. Obviously, we're going to still hold tfos lashon rishon if you're Beit Shammai. Again, this is Rabbi Yochanan talking according to Chizkiya, I was talking according to Beit Shammai. So then, for sure, we're going to say tfos lashon rishon because what is tfos lashon rishon based on? That you started off saying, I'm going to do X. Then you changed your mind. And you don't want to do it anymore. You don't want to be a Nazir. You don't want to bring your mincha. And then you change, right? First you say, I want to be a Nazir. I want to bring a mincha. And a second later, you change your mind. And so you spout some nonsense. Like, I'm going to be a Nazir from figs. I'm going to bring a mincha from lentils. We don't care. Because tfos l'shon rishon, we go by the first thing you said. You already said, arei alai mincha. So that is obvious. And it's obvious once you say we hold tfos l'shon rishon. But what is more of a chidush, as we say, is ela afilu min hasorim nami. Even if you said from barley. Why? Why is that a bigger chidush? Because if you said something completely nonsensical, then obviously you meant to change your mind. And we don't care that you meant to change your mind because anyway, you said already and you took it upon yourself and you can't go back. But you might have thought maybe you could change your mind with the sorim. Why? Maybe you could shift. Why? Because maybe it wasn't a change of mind, okay? Maybe we'd say that if you said min hasorim, you wouldn't actually have to bring anything. Why? Because now it's based on the same theory that you might make a mistake, but here they take it to a different place. When the person said harei alai mincha min ha'adashim, what we basically say is we stop you in the middle, right? It's as if the first thing you said was, I'm taking a mincha by myself, and then you changed it. But according to this, Rabbi Yochanan said min hasorim, you might have thought that you said one statement of, I want to bring a mincha from barley, because I thought I could do that. And then, but I don't want to bring a mincha from wheat. When you tell me there is no such thing, I said, oh, well, that's all I wanted to bring. So now you don't have to bring anything because that's not what you intended, right? You intended just barley, and there is no such thing. And it was a mistake. It wasn't like you said, I want to bring a mincha and then change your mind and added some nonsense. No, you thought there was actually such a thing as a mincha of sorim. So you said, I'm committing to bring a mincha of sorim, which actually doesn't exist. So we don't do any break, because there's no break in what you said. It's one statement. Mincha ben hasorim. From the beginning, you didn't think I want to bring a regular mincha. All you wanted to do is bring a barley one, and there is no such thing. As I'll read again in the words. The person might have made a mistake thinking that existed. We still go by the fact that you said mincha. We don't care that you said for barley. We don't care that you thought it was a mincha barley and there was such a thing, and maybe you didn't really want to bring a chitin. You said mincha, tough luck. Okay, you have to bring a mincha. That's Beit Shammai. Okay. Turning now to Amud Bet. Amar Ze'eri. Okay. According to Rashi, and Rambam disagrees, but we're going to read the sugya according to Rashi. Ze'eri is now speaking within Beit Shammai like Chizkiya. Okay, that's tfos l'shon rishon. And comes the area does another loshanu. The Mishna is only referring to, okay, like Chizkiya came and said only min hasorim, not adashim. So Eri is going to come and say now, and it's very similar to what we just ended on, loshanu ela de amar mincha, aval lo amar mincha lo, meaning you had to have said hare in order for tfos l'shon rishon to work. You have to say harei alai mincha, where we can say okay, no matter what you said, min hasorim, lentils, mina adashim, doesn't matter. As soon as you say the word harei alai mincha, you've already committed. Okay? That's Beit Shammai. But if you said harei alai seorim, let's say, you just said, I'm taking upon myself barley. Obviously you meant barley for mincha, because what else is barley in the temple, taking upon yourself? But you didn't use the word mincha. Well, there is no lashon rishon to say, oh, but you said mincha. You didn't actually say the word mincha, even though you meant it. But you didn't say it, right? We have to have where you said something and then kind of changed your mind and we cancel that, right? But he basically says if you don't use the word mincha, or even Rashi says, this is even more extreme. If you say the word minchat se'orim, where the word mincha is there, but the way minchat se'orim, if you know the Hebrew language, this is what's called smichut. In English, you would say a mincha of se'orim, okay? But because it's viewed as one phrase, you can't break it in the middle. When you say, I'm going to bring a mincha, and then you say, of barley, that works. But when you use the term minchat se'orim, the taf at the end of that mincha word means already in the first phrase, you're not saying a mincha, you're saying a mincha of, as if it's one word, because in Hebrew it is one word. A mincha of barley. So you can't stop in the middle and say, oh, cut off at mincha. You accepted a mincha. No. From the beginning, you said mincha of barley. So since you said mincha of barley, or I would say it like this, the way to translate into English is, I'm bringing a barley mincha. That's the way minchat se'orim would translate. Barley came first before mincha really, or it came at the same moment. So you can't say divided in time. First you said mincha, then you changed your mind. So there was never an acceptance of an actual mincha according to that. Okay, so then it wouldn't work. You wouldn't have to bring. Now what's the problem? There's an interesting problem. I don't know if depends how you read the Mishnah. I'm going to go back to the Mishnah for a minute. The Mishnah said, okay, first case works perfectly fine. Omer hare alai mincha from se'orim min se'orim. Okay, so there you can stop. Yavim menachitim. But then the Mishnah says, kemach yavi solet. Lo shem lo levana, yavi shem lo levana. That's Yisrael. Notice what's missing before all those words. The word mincha. Okay? Never says mincha. Now, there's two ways to read that Mishnah, right? The topic sentence of the Mishnah, or it's ha'omer hare alai mincha, colon, and then we have example one from se'orim, kemach, with oil, without oil, without frankincense, right? And the words hare alai mincha go with all of them. Okay? That's the first way to read it. Hare alai mincha, colon, case 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the way they're going to read this is, case number 1 is hare alai mincha, min se'orim. Case 2 is hare alai kemach, hare alai shem b'li shemen ulevona, without the word mincha. And they're going to say, so that doesn't fit with zeiri. Okay, and the obvious answer is going to be, no. It meant mincha of. Okay, because there's two ways to read the Mishnah. So this we're going to zip right through because it's very clear. Yativ Rav Nachman Karmel al Hashmata. So after Zeiri said this, Rav Nachman comes to the Beit Midrash and he teaches it. And his Rava comes over to him. The student, Eitive Rava Rav Nachman, he says, what are you talking about? The Mishnah says, Kemach Yavi Solet, without the word mincha. My love, Delo Amar mincha. Is it not a case where he didn't say the word mincha? And there you see the law is just like the first case where he said mincha. So Zeiri's wrong. Lo, the Amar mincha. So Rav Nachman says, no. It means hare alai mincha with kemach. Okay, even though it didn't say it, it obviously meant it. Again, colon, right? Hare alai mincha, colon, mina se'orim, mina kemach, etc. And then they're going to just do the same thing with all the lines in the Mishnah. Below shemen and below levana, yavi shemen and levana. My, right, quote from the Mishnah. My lav de lo amar mincha. Note the word mincha is missing there. Lo, de amar mincha. Rav Nachman answered, no. It's where he said mincha. Mincha without shemen, without levona. Chatzi saron, yavi saron shalem. My lav de lo amar mincha. Lo, the amar mincha. Same thing. It didn't say mincha there. Oh no, must be you brought mincha. Now they're going to have a problem with that. Ihachi, if you really said mincha, then the last case is going to provide a problem. Let's see. Ema seifa, look at the last case. Isaron v'mechze yavi shnayim. If I say I'm going to bring, and now we're going to have to add the words, a mincha of isaron v'mechze, you have to bring 2. So now they're going to say it doesn't make sense you should bring 2. You should only bring 1. Why? Kevan da amar mincha, if we go tfas lashon rishon, so you said mincha, and then you said isaron. So what do you have to bring? A mincha v'nisaron, right? Ichayev lebi isaron. So you said mincha, isaron. Okay, so far so good. You said mincha, you said isaron. You bring a mincha and isaron. Ki amar chatzi isaron, but then you added and a half. But there is no such thing as a half. So lo klum ka amarhu. We should just ignore that, right? We go by lashon rishon, right? We should just ignore your half isaron, which is nothing. So you should only bring 1 isaron. Why does the Mishnah say you bring 2? So if the word mincha, if you just said isaron v'mechtzeh, then we look at it as 1.5. If we say mincha and isaron, then the mincha already goes with the isaron, and that's a mincha v'nisaron, and we shouldn't need more. So they say, lo tzricha. Here we're going to explain it. De'amar hare alai mincha chatzi isaron v'isaron. They're going to say, when we said isaron v'mechtzeh, we really meant where you said the words like this. Hare alai mincha, and now we're switching the order. Chatzi isaron and an isaron. Okay, now what happens here? Instead of having 2 statements, really, I'm bringing a mincha and isaron and a half. it ends up being 3. Why? Because by Tfos Lashon Rishon theory, what happens? You said Harei Elai Saron, Harei Elai Mincha, and then you say Chatzi Saron. Now, there is no such thing. So what do we say that means? Oh, Mincha, regular Mincha. Mincha, okay, Dekevan Da'amar Mincha, as soon as you say the words Harei Elai Mincha, you're already Chayiv Lebu Saron. You're already obligated in Yisarot. Then you said a half, and then you said a whole. So now we're going to go through. Ki amar chatzi isaron v'lo klum kamar. We ignore your half isaron because there's no such thing. Ki hadar amar isaron, but then at the end you said in isaron, after you already committed harei alai mincha in isaron, then you said another isaron. That's where we get to maita isaron achrina. Then you have to bring another isaron, and that's how we got to 2. Okay? So we have to switch the order, and it has to be chatzi isaron v'isaron in order for this to make sense once we add the word mincha. Okay, and then you have basically 3 statements. I'm going to bring a mincha, which already is an isaron. I'm going to bring chatzi isaron, which is nothing. Ignore that. And then I'm going to bring an isaron, and that's basically another isaron. And that's why you bring 2. This all works fine, except for one problem. Rabbi Shimon disagrees. He says this is not kederach hamitnadvim. So Rabbi Shimon poter shalom in the day of kederach hamitnadvim. This is not the way people volunteer offerings. Amai. Why not? You could say harei alai mincha v'nisaron, and another isaron. You should have to bring 2 and just ignore the one that made no sense. So to which they answer, Rabbi Shimon, Amar Rava. Rava now explains Rabbi Shimon's position, which we haven't really fully explained. He says, and this is going to resolve this problem, Rabbi Shimon b'shitat Rabbi Yossi Amar. We keep comparing it to other machlokot where we have statements that people said that make no sense. So one was the Nazir case, machloket Beit Shammai Beit Hillel. Now we're moving to a machloket. Rabbi Yossi, forgot who his machloket is with, but he has this machloket in Tmura. We're going to get there, where he says, I just want to see, maybe it says who he disagrees with in Rashi. No, he doesn't bring it. But Rabbi Yossi disagrees there with a different position, where if somebody says this is a Tmurat Shlamim, Tmurat Olah, which you can't say this is replacing both a Shlamim and an Olah. So there's a whole thing about what you have to do there. Do we go by, again, there's a machlok there. Tfos Lashon Rishon. Okay, you said, let's say it was Shlamim first. So we go by Shlamim. Okay? But Rabbi Yossi says, A'af bigmar dvarav adam nitpas. Okay, it should be nitpas. That's what Rashi says. Okay, here it says matpis by me, but it should be nitpas. But nitpas is like your words take effect. Even at the end of your words, okay, af also gets added. It's even. Okay, without that, it's not, you are nitpas. So if you say bigmar dvarav adam matpis, nitpas, it sounds like we go by, it's the opposite of tfos Lashon Rishon. Tfos Lashon Rishon is we go by the beginning. Bigmar dvarav adam nitpas means we go by what you said last. But that's not what he means. He means even what you said at the end. It's a different opposite of Tfos Lashon Rishon. It's saying that we have to look at the whole statement of what you said. Okay, Rabbi Shimon must hold like Rabbi Yossi that we don't cut it in the middle and say beginning is more important, or you change your mind to at the end is what's significant. No, we look at everything. In the end, you said 1.5. There's no such thing as 1.5. So basically, it's nothing. We say you said mincha, but you also said from barley. There is no such thing. So we look at it, the whole picture. We don't just take part of what you said, beginning part, end part. No. We look at the whole thing and we say, does this make sense? No. So you didn't say anything. Okay? That's why he says it. And therefore it doesn't matter whether we view it before as, oh, you said mincha, that's an isaron. You said another isaron and we can ignore the half in the middle. We can't ignore the half in the middle because we look at the whole statement of what you said. And that's why Rabbi Shimon disagrees. And therefore there's no difficulty. With that, we finish the Mishna. Okay, or the dealing with that Mishna. Now we're moving on to the next Mishna. And now we get into the 60 number that we've discussed some other time. And we're going to talk about this now, straight on. Like we've referenced this here and there. What's the 60 number and its significance? It's a very weird number. We're going to talk about that. You can obviously do a mincha of 1 isaron, but you can do any amount you want. Again, as long as it's in round esronim. You can get up to 60, and if you get up to 60 and you say, I'm bringing 60, it all goes in one vessel. Okay, again, I want to remind you how big 60 isaron is. It's 120 kilo, okay? It's like over 50 pounds of flour. So that's that's a very crazy number to think about, all being in one vessel. That's a crazy amount of flour. It's a very hard number to understand, and we'll see that perhaps that caused some arguing here, but we're going to get to it. So if I say, and they're clearly bringing an exaggerated case, if I say I'm bringing a mincha of 60 isaron, I bring it all in one vessel. I put all the flour in, I put the oil, and I mix it. Now, the next few words by Mir in parentheses, we're going to cut them out. Imamar hare alai shishim ve'echad, but if you say I'm bringing 61, you can do that. It's not like you can't bring it. You can't say I'm bringing a mincha more than 60. You can. Maybe shishim b'kli echad ve'echad b'kli echad. What do you do though? You bring the maximum number you can bring in one vessel. That's 60. But the other one you put in a new vessel. And 62, same thing. 2 in the other vessel. Okay? You can go up to 60 in one vessel. Now we're going to have to figure out why. So we're going to have a machloket, Tana Kama, and Rabbi Shimon. Why is 60 this magic number? Sheken hatzibur mevi b'yom tov harishon shel chag shechal liyot b'shabbat 61. Say, well, the most libations you bring on obligatory sacrifices, the biggest day where you have the most sacrifices, the most libations, is going to be on the first day of Pesach that comes out on Shabbat. And you're going to end up with the maximum possible number you could have on that day is 61 esronim of solid. Why? Let's go through. 13, you bring 13 bulls on the first day of Sukkot. I hope I didn't say Pesach. Sukkot. So, if I said Pesach, sorry, but Sukkot. First day of Sukkot, you bring 13 bulls. 13 times 3 esronim, shelsha esronim lapar, so 39. 2 rams times 2, because you bring 2 esronim per ram, 4. Got up to 43. 14 sheep. Okay, that's the korban for Sukkot is 14 sheep. That gets you up to 1 isaron per sheep, so another 14. We're up to 43. 14, you're up to 57. Now you have 2 kvasim you bring for the korban tamid, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening. That ends up another 2 esronim. And another 2 esronim because it's Shabbat. You bring 2 kvasim on Shabbat. So that adds another 4. We're up to 61. So now the theory is, so if the maximum number someone can bring is 61 for communal offering, we're going to drop it down 1. We don't want the yachid to bring the maximum number of the community. So the yachid drops down 1, and 60 is the magic number. And it comes from that the first day of Sukkot that falls on Shabbat. Amar Rabbi Shimon, v'alo elu leparim ve'elu lekvasim ve'enam nivelim zeim zeh. He says, that's a ridiculous answer. Because that would assume all 61 go in one bowl. But they don't, because the whole thing is about 60 in a bowl. It's not what's the maximum you can voluntarily offer. He says they can't go in the bowl together. Why not? First of all, there's separate libations for different korbanot. And also, there's different amount, there's a different ratio. Remember, it's a 1-to-2 ratio. How much oil to solet go in the parim and the elim? It's 1-to-2. But it's 1-to-3, right? 3 log oil for 1 isaron of flour in the sheep one. So you can't mix them together because you're going to have too much oil in some and too little oil in others. So they don't even go in the same bowl. So this has nothing to do with anything. So Rabbi Shimon says, what's the reason? It can be mixed in a bowl. Okay, try to imagine this. 120 kilo of flour. Oh, wow, I said the wrong amount. 120 kilo is actually way more pounds. Sorry, I did the opposite, right? It's 2.2 pounds per kilo. It's way more than that. Sorry, did the complete wrong amount. It's times 2.2 that amount in pounds. So anyway, until 60, you can mix it, okay? That amount can be mixed in the bowl. But more than that, you can't mix in the bowl. Okay, thank you. It's 264.5 pounds. Okay, that's a crazy amount. So, basically, until 60, it can be mixed. After that, it can't be mixed. Okay, so, what does that mean? So, Rashi says, what does this mean? He must hold like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that is 1 log, no matter how many esronim you have. And then, 1 log can mix into, let's say, 50, but not into 60. Okay, that's hard to imagine. I think that's still very difficult. Even if, let's say, it's 60 log, though, other people explain, it's hard to mix, right? Anyone who knows when you make challah, right, the bigger your dough, the harder it is to mix if you're going to mix it by hand. So, 60 is the number. Amru lo, they said to him, Shishim nivlelim v'shishim ve'echad ein nivlelim? Okay, wait, you're going to say 60 and not 61? Okay, now, his response is, Amar lahem, kol midoch chachamim ken. Look, you could start arguing that about any shiur of the rabbis. And here he brings an example. The amount for a mikvah was figured out, assessed at the amount a person could, if they crunch up their body, could fit in a space of 40 se'ah exactly. So they said 40 se'ah exactly. What if it's missing a teeny bit, a few drops? What, a person can't fit in there? Rabbi Shimon said that's just the way shiurim of Chachamim are. This sounds a bit like the Rabbi Yirmiyah discussion, right? 1 foot in, 1 foot out. What do you do? And Rabbi Shimon said, look, you could make that argument with all cases, but maybe not necessarily, because maybe what they're saying is to say that this 60 is connected to a measurement of what can be mixed. That's not a reasonable number, right? I would think maybe more like 10 or something like that, right? And I think they were more so bothered by the number 60 in terms of mixing. Okay, now we're going to basically have the same thing. The Gemara is going to bring a braita with a little bit more expansion on the debate between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. It starts off with Sha'il She'ela Lamalami Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eli. So they were in the Beit Midrash, I guess, of Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eli. That's the Rabbi Yehuda stam that we see in the Mishna all the time. So they asked a question in the Beit Midrash, or to him, Minay Omer Harei Alai Shishim Be'echad Mevi Shishim B'Kli Echad. Where do we get? What's the source for this? Ve'echad B'Kli Echad, right? If you say 61, you're going to bring 60 in one vessel, one in the other. Patach Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eli, so he was in the Beit Midrash, and he starts, because Rosh HaMidabrim B'chol Makom, he's the first to speak in all places. This actually comes from a very famous story in Shabbat, Lami Gimel Amud Bet. Rashi reminds us of this in the discussion about the Romans. He said nice things about the Romans, and then there were people who said negative things about the Romans, and they were tattletaled on them, right? That's the whole Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai story. So if you want to review it, you can go look back at Lami Gimel Amud Bet, and that's where he gets this title of he's the first to speak, so that's why he starts first. V'amal shekem matzinu b'tzibur shemivim b'yom tov rishon shachad shechal yom shabbat shishim be'echad zayol yachid shivcho min hatzibur echad. He brings the rabbi's claim, the 61 of Sukkot. Amar lo Rabbi Shimon, v'alo elu parim ve'elim ve'elu kfasim. But there's bulls and rams, which have a different ratio than the sheep. Elu b'leatam avav, elu b'leatam rakari. Those are thick, those are thin, more oil, less oil. And he adds another thing, elu b'leatam shachariv, elu b'leatam ben arbaim. Also, you have the shnei kvasim of the tmidim. One gets mixed in the morning, one gets mixed in the afternoon, right? Again, we're talking about the libations that go with all these sacrifices. They don't happen at the same time. They certainly don't go in the same bowl. Ve'ein nivlalim mizal zeh. You don't mix them together. Amru lo emorata. Okay, so you tell us, Rabbi Shimon, right? That's so Rabbi Yehuda says to him. It should be amar lo. There's a bunch of your sayings in terms of singular. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Rabbi Yehuda says to him, okay, so tell me what your reason is. Amar lahem, harei omer, v'chol mincha b'lulav Hashem v'charevad. It has to be mixed with oil. For Amrat Torah, the Torah already said, havei mincha sheyichola libalel. Bring a mincha that can be mixed. Amar lo, b'shishim nivlalim, b'shim v'echad ein nivlalim. Well, what kind of number is this, right? 61, it's not. So far, this is really all the same almost. Amar lo, komida chachamim hu, kenhu. All the shirim you could say this about. So, and obviously we have to, this is like a classic, we have to give a cutoff point somewhere. Barba'im se'ah utovel, barba'im se'ah chatzor kurtov. Kurtov is just a little bit. Eno echol litbol. Okay, that we did already. Now we're moving on to the next one. Kibeitza metame tumat ochlin. Kibeitza chaser shum shum metame tumat ochlin. The size of an egg, it can pass on impurity. But if you take, one sesame seed size out of that shi'or and you have a food that's a teeny bit below, it's not going to be. It's just the way it works. This is if you sit on something. There's like a zav. They have tumah where if you sit on something, it actually gets tumah. So what's the shear of sitting on something? Has to be like a piece of material that's 3 by 3 handbreadths, because that's something someone theoretically could sit on. And what? If it's missing one thread, like that's just the way it is. Now they ask another question, Rabbi Shimon. This we didn't see. Why is it so important to be mixed? Because we already learned, lo balal kasher. If you didn't mix it, it's okay. So why would that be the number to determine? It doesn't even have to be mixed. To which they say, the very famous Amar Rabbi Zera, right? This answers the question they asked about Rabbi Shimon. This is actually the Gemara asking. This is no longer the Braita. Amar Rabbi Zera, kol ha'ro'eh lebila ein bila ma'akevet, v'kol she'ein ro'eh lebila bila ma'akevet. This is a very famous halacha we've talked about in the mikvah. Like if you need earplugs in the mikvah, you can go in right with cotton where theoretically it could get in. Right? It can't be something that completely blocks the water, that even if you'd stay under there 20 minutes, right, no water would get in. If that's the problem, because anything, and it comes from here, this is it. If it can be potentially mixed, even if you don't mix it, right, it has to be at least able to be potentially mixed. So you don't have to mix the mincha, but if it can't be potentially mixed, then you can't do it. So that's the thing with like water in the mikveh. The water has to get into all the holes in your body, but they don't actually have to get in. It just has to be capable of getting in. That's the idea here. And it comes from this. Okay, last part for today's stuff. Since we were talking about shiurim, we're getting off on a complete tangent here. We're going to end in a very interesting, kind of depressing statement. Amar Bivi, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Maaseh b'pirda achat shel Beit Rabbi Shemeta, v'shiru chachamim et hama b'revi'it. So Rabbi Bivi says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Levi, there was a mule that died, and in the house of Rabbi, and they assessed the blood at a reviv. They said the blood of a nevela carries impurity at the size of a revi'it halog, a quarter log. Okay, that's what we're talking about, shiurim. So, much of Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Bisna, now we're getting off on a complete tangent. There's nothing to do with the shiurim anymore. He says, but it says in the Mishna, Eidu Yod He'iv, Rabbi Yeshua ben Betera, Al Dam Nevelochu Tahor. A nevela, the flesh of the animal is carries impurity, but the blood doesn't carry any impurity. Okay, so it's very nice talking about shiurim, what's shiur of blood, but blood isn't even metame. So what are you talking about? And they continue to quote that Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Betera, Maasev hayu nocharim arodiyot la'arayot asrat ish hamelech. On the big, path to get to the king, they were killing, not slaughtering, they were killing donkeys, wild donkeys, to feed to the lions. And this is not the Jews. People were doing this. V'hayu olei regalim, but as everyone was going on aliyah regel, they wwere ad rekuvoteim b'dam. They were up to their knees in blood. V'lo amru lahem davar. The rabbis didn't say go to the mikveh, go get tahor, because you're going to the aliyah regel. You're going to the temple to bring sacrifices. So Rabbi Bi Ishtik, he didn't know what to answer. Okay. Amarle. Now we're completely off even this topic. Why don't you give him an answer? There's an answer. Why don't you give it to him? Okay, so here comes Rabbi Vivi. Tomorrow you're going to have to wait till the next stuff, which will go up very soon because it's Shabbos stuff, but you'll have to wait till the next stuff to get to the answer to his question. But Rabbi Vivi responds to him. Okay, you got to be careful what you ask people. So Rabbi Sreika said, why don't you answer him? You had an answer. So he says, Amarle, how do you expect me to answer this question? Okay, very sad answer. Da'amar Rabbi Chanin. And they quote this pasuk from Devarim, where it talks about in the Tochach at the end of Sefer Devarim, where it talks about all the bad things that are going to befall the Jewish people. It says, your life will be hanging for you in front of you. You're going to be fearful night and day. And you're not going to have any faith in your life. Okay, what do the three parts of that pasuk mean? This is someone who doesn't own land, and they have to buy their wheat in advance, a year in advance. The second phrase is talking about someone who can't afford to buy it all a year in advance. So what do? They buy it week to week. And that's the person who relies on the baker. Basically, if I make money today, I'll be able to buy bread tomorrow. If I don't make money today, I'll have nothing to eat. And me, Al palter samich. This is my life. I'm basically feeding hand to mouth, right? I'm basically buying every day, working, and you expect me to come up with answers to these questions? I don't have the headspace for it. Okay, it's a great answer, right? And it's saying, why are you looking at me? And it's a lesson to learn in terms of trying to put people on the spot. Come on, you should know what you're doing. And, maybe it's also helpful to us who have things on our mind that distract us. It makes it hard to learn, right? So, hopefully we're not in that kind of dire straits, but it's very hard to learn and focus when you have other things on your mind. With that thought, we finished for today. So we started with the kasher nadar tavlo kasher frashta, right? It's only b'shat haneder that there's an issue there of what you committed to bring the machvat, and then you have to bring the machvat. Then we moved to the mincha and seorim, and we had the whole two opinions. Is it tfos lashon rishon to Beit Shammai, or is it only in a case where the person said, "Oh, I didn't realize. Obviously, I would have said chitim if I knew." And then we had the opposite, they said, and we said, oh, Chizkiya changed his mind. Rabbi Yochanan was just talking according to Chizkiya. Why did you change your mind? I could have supported you could have given support for your theory. Then Ze'eri came along within Tfos Lashon Rishon and said it's only if you say the word mincha. Otherwise, there is no Lashon Rishon Tfos, so to speak. And then we talked about his opinion and worked it out. And then we got to the 60 and not 61 and the machloka between the rabbis and Rabbi Shimon about where that comes from. From there, this whole discussion about what's the importance really of shiurim. With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.